Alright. Today I will be talking about the misrepresentation of women in film. Sorry, specifically through the male gaze. Just a quick disclaimer. I do not think that all film is misogynistic. I don't think the vast majority of films are misogynistic. I don't think all the male cast members, male crew, male directors, and even the male audience, I do not think this is they are misogynistic. Through this project, I just wanted to report on a phenomenon that film theorists have discussed since the 70s. All right. So the male gaze has become a bit of a buzzword, especially through social media like TikTok, and is often misused. With that misuse comes a misconception of what it actually is. So I think it is important to first discuss what is the male gaze. The male gaze is the way in which women are objectified within film. It is used to describe a narrative that portrays women in a different light and often reduces them down into a thing and rather than a human. Through this, the male character, the male lead, is empowered and is put in a position of power over the woman. Um, and the male, through the male gaze, the woman's importance is completely dependent on the man because her point in the narrative is to please him, whether that's through different avenues. We'll talk about that later. The origin history of the male gaze. Um, the male gaze was first mentioned by a film theorist named Laura Mulvey in her seminal essay, Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema. This essay was first published in 1975 in an international academic journal called Screen, which focuses on film and television. Laura Mulvey is a film theorist who she has done a lot of work such as movies, writing, such and such, and she is currently teaching film and media studies at the University of London. She is the first person to give a name to the misogyny that was being observed within film, specifically throughout and during this time and before this. There are three perspectives of the male gaze that Laura Mulvey outlines within her essay. The first one is the audience. She focuses on two psychoanalyst theories in order to explain her idea. The first one being Freud. She takes Freud's idea of scopophilia to explain their love. The literal translation for scopophilia is the love of looking. Freud defined in his 3 essays on sexuality that the pleasure an individual receives from looking at another, or that scopophilia is the sexual pleasure that someone receives from looking at another. Scopophilia portrays a unique position within film because cinema allows for for our voyeuristic tendencies to be allowed because of the darkness of the cinema and the bright visual stimulation of the screen before us. That creates this isolation, this false sense of personal relationship, the idea that you're looking into a separate world for a brief moment in time. The cinema further allows for us to develop our scopophilic nature and explore it through Lacan. Lacan had what is described as the mirror stage. According to Lacan, the mirror stage is when an infant first looks at itself in the mirror. Their ego is, or their identity is established. However, at the same time, that identity, that ego, is then projected onto that reflection that they see in the mirror, creating separating the ego and the ID, which is the ego is your morals and what you think is right and your actions, but the ID being the underlying desires, the innate desires within inside of you. This, although it is a minor thing in terms of scopophilia and in terms of the male gaze, that creates a narcissistic sense of self. So with it, how it relates to cinema is that when the audience member is watching a film, they project themselves and their identity onto that male character and onto that lead. Both of these things objectify the woman because it places, with Freud's idea, they're looking at the woman in a sexual manner and disregarding her personhood. And with Lacan, they're placing their identity in themselves within that male lead, which is already in a position of power over the woman through that objectification. The second perspective of the male gaze is the camera. The camera and cinematography holds a unique position within film because of the way that whenever we are watching a film, we are only able to see things that the camera wants us to see. The camera has the ability to draw our focus, to center our focus onto one object and one thing at a time, and that is all we can look at. The way that this is portrayed in film is like long, slow shots that scale up the body, such as Megan Fox in Transformers, and like shots that like fixate on body parts, which is prevalent throughout the entirety of cinema, especially before the 70s and mainly like the old westerns and such, are used to objectify her because they pull the viewer's attention solely on her body, which when we are watching this movie and we are immersed in it, we aren't really thinking of her as a person, and we're focusing on like on her body and like her physical appearance rather than her identity. And then the third perspective of the male gaze is the characters within the film. With the audience through the Lacan's mirror stage, identifying with the main character or the male lead within films. It allows for further objectification because they are allowed to look at the woman the same way the male lead does. That way being like the male, so like the way the male character treats and looks at the women is how the audience will portray her. And if that is in a way that like completely focuses on nothing else but her appearance and her like physicality, it doesn't matter. Like she's not a person. So I'm going to talk about two examples of the male gaze today within film. And the first example is The Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock. The male lead, L.B. Jeffries, is wheelchair bound and spends his time like watching from his window and observing these characters through his window. Is observing his neighbors through his window, and he starts to make inferences about him. It obviously goes deeper, and like he watches his neighbor get murdered and is trying to solve it. But today we'll be focusing on like how the male gaze is portrayed in it. When Hitchcock made this movie, like he made Jeffries a representation of the audience because he is watching his neighbors and making inferences about who they are and their lives through a small little window. The first character that portrays the male gaze or shows the male gaze and the effects of it within this film is Miss Torso, which is that woman down there. The male Miss Torso during the film is someone who like is solely like portrayed in a sexualized manner. Like she is usually half naked, dancing around in her apartment. L.B. Jeffries is just watching her, observing her, and focusing solely like on her body. She like really doesn't have a backstory like his other neighbors do. She is just her, and then he watches her throw these like parties and entertain the males. Like so, her entire identity within this film is focused on her body and the males in which she entertains. Miss Lonely Hearts is also one of his neighbors who he watches, and he theorizes that like she is very lonely, like she's depressed, like she has no love, and at the end of the movie she like almost attempts to kill herself because she has no man. But however, she is saved by a man through one of his other neighbors, the songwriter. When she hears his song and is like, "Oh, I need to live," and they eventually fall in love and get married. That shows like her entire life goal, her entire objective was just to find love and places her importance on her life in that man. And then Lisa Fremont, although she like is developed throughout the story and her character is developed, L.B. Jeffries at the beginning and while they're trying to solve this murder doesn't really like show interest in Lisa Fremont, even though it is explicitly explained that she is the ideal woman. Like she is a socialite, she's rich, she's like she has proper manners, like she is what everyone wants. But Jeffries does not. It is not until that she's almost killed by the neighbor who killed his wife that they're trying to solve that Jeffries is like, "Oh, I really like we're actually meant to be together. Like I really like you. I want to develop a relationship with you, or further a relationship with each other." Because like that heroism, that act of heroism, gave him the importance to love her, and like boosted his ego, which is what Lacan was doing. And then my last example is The Virgin Suicides by Sofia Coppola. Although this movie is based off a book, Sofia Coppola interpreted the movie as it's like the story about 5 sisters who work in a very religiously strict household and who all ended up killing themselves. because of this. However, the entire movie and the entire book is through the perspective of the male neighbors who watch them and are retelling their stories. Um, the entirety of like their lives and their importance is like an incomplete narrative because it is told through the story of the males who like have this idealized view of them. They don't regard them as like actual beings who like went through suffering. They're like, yeah, these are just these angelic figures who ended up killing themselves like out of desperation. Like they don't see that they were actually suffering, and it's led to this skewed narrative, which leads to the entire movie being like an unreliable narrator. And like you can even see it in the name of the movie, like the virgin suicides. Like um, that places like almost a holy image onto these women and takes away like their identity. So what does the Bible say? Um, both of these like verses talk about like the sexual immorality that we hold within our lives that we need to put it to death because it's like an idolatry within our lives and it can take place over God. And then also the Bible talks about how like women also have importance in the church. Like God made each of us equally, and so we need to remain equal within each other. And that's like the male gaze does not do that within film and does not portray an equal representation of each gender. All right, that's it.
All right. I got a couple things for you.
Hmm?
So hold on, I'm trying to do two things at once here. Um, so when we're talking about another thing, I appreciate the caveat at the beginning that this isn't something that happens in totality, but it happens a lot more than a lot of people give it credit for, especially men. Like, here's the thing: in a room full of a bunch of guys, this is, I'm gonna be honest with you, like man to men here. This is one of those topics that a female classmate is doing you a favor by presenting, because this is something that just looking at just passing judgment here. I'm admitting passing judgment here is one of those things that will be very likely to. I'm not going to say go over your head as much as it is. It won't be on your radar. It's something that you need to be told to be careful of. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of vices. I'll call them sins. There's a lot of sins in our life that if we're not careful, we're going to assume we don't have a problem with because they're the type of thing that you don't see in yourself. Does making sense? Y'all ever have a flaw? Y'all ever have a problem that you just didn't see until you see it yourself? Or I'm sorry, until somebody tells you that you have it, somebody that you respect. I remember one of the most life changing things I ever experienced was I mean I thought I was one of the best basketball players my school had ever had the pleasure of having until my coach filmed one of our games and made us watch it, and I run like that. Forget how good at basketball I was. I was self conscious just the way I was running because I didn't know I was. Is this making sense? Like this is something that you might not be aware of until someone on the outside of your perspective tells you, "Hey, you should probably watch out." So that's just another caveat. Okay. Another thing I think worth mentioning. There's also it's not just a matter of how women are portrayed. I appreciate that perspective. There's also a sense in which men are portrayed. Like there's another side to this coin. However, let's also be candid about the nature of the beast, and that is that men being immensely more visual creatures than women tend to be, and just the way God built us and the way God designed it, by us, I mean men and women. The puzzle pieces that God meant to be put together with men and women, this is how this works. Which is again to Madelyn's point that that's what makes movies so immensely powerful. Right? She mentioned a book that got turned into a movie. I've never read the book. I've never seen the movie. Here's my question. All that to say, here's my question: is the male gaze something that is exclusive to movies? I'm guessing not, but I'd like to hear your explanation of that. But then also, like, if so, then if it is something that can happen in something other than movies, music, books, whatever, How does that happen exactly?
I think the male gaze is like exclusive to cinema, whether that's film or TV, because I talked about this in like when I was first like theorizing my project and what I wanted it to be. Books delve so much deeper into like just reality and like a narrative than movies do, and that like because movies are only 2 hours, like 3 hours. Books can go on for like thousands of pages if they author writes it. Um, I think the books like portray objectification in a much different way. Although like it can appear the same, it just goes much deeper. Because film, like as with the three parts of it, you don't really see that within books. Like the main part of the male gaze is like the part that the audience has to play with it or play in it. Um, like through Lacan and specifically Freud, like I said, like that when you're watching a movie, especially in a cinema, it creates like this. Lore Mulvey called it a voyeuristic separation, so that it allows for like complete isolation or the facade of isolation between the audience and the screen, and allows the audience member to develop an interpersonal relationship with the movie and the characters in it.
Her paper's really fascinating. That'll be good. Spend some time. A little more self-implication here. And I hate to say it because I love comic books so much. But comic book movies are notorious for what Madelyn's talking about. When the first Avengers movie came out, I know it's been ages since that happened. But when the first Avengers movie came out, someone came out with a poster that said, "What if all of the male Avengers posed the way that the female Avenger did?" There's only one of them. Scarlett Johansson standing in a very provocative stance, which is like, "Hey, why is she turned around like that? Come on, you know why she's turned around like that. You know why she's posed that way. You know full well why she's posed that way." And so to parody that, to kind of, I think, prove the point, it's this hilarious poster of all the male, that's Chris Hemsworth turned around showing off his butt and, whatever. And it's like, that's silly. That's ridiculous. It's kind of weird. That's to the point. Now, granted, the other side of that coin is all of those male Avengers, they are striking a pose, showing off how many muscles they got and how masculine. And so, we've got other presentations that talk about body dysmorphia. We've got, Doris going today, I think. We've got all these problems that we are very well aware of that men have on their side of the equation. What Madelyn's representing today is female concern of this, that women are specifically objectified in a particular way. And I think that's the root of the whole thing. Like, sorry to keep drawing back to I'm such a fan of when y'all's projects prove what we've been trying to do in this class all year. Y'all are verifying and validating what we've been trying to do this entire year. I told you a long time ago, we will know what it means to have a healthy culture when we know what it means to be a whole person. And objectification, film, books, music, TV, whatever, objectification, turning a subject into an object, turning a person into an object, is always reducing that person to less than what they actually are. And the point of my takeaway is that far too often movies, in a very attractive way, slide in there that, hey, this actress with all of her talents and abilities portraying a very powerful narrative. Yeah, but we're going to turn the camera from this angle, and all of a sudden that subject becomes an object. Y'all seeing how this works? Like that's what's. So I really appreciate the project. Y'all got any questions for Matt?
I have one for example.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is such thing as a female gaze that is touched on by Laura Mulvey in her essay, but she says that she does not have time to go on it. But there's a essay called yes, there is like a female gaze, and here's what it is. But it's portrayed like the objectification of men in that is portrayed in a different way than the objectification of women through the male gaze. It is a completely separate thing due to like the social standards and the social that we have set up for ourselves and the social hierarchies within culture. So like yes, it is a thing. It is very real, and it is important to look at when discussing film. But this presentation was just focusing on the objectification of women.
I have kind of a multi-tiered question.
Yeah.
So with
Yeah, Stella.
But I mean, they're doing everything. Like she goes, gets the key to the apartment, goes in the apartment. There's that big scene where it's the
Yeah.
she sees yes, like that whole thing. But and then the nurse is like always like making sure that he knows that he's a cripple in a wheelchair. He can't do anything. He's not really a man at this point. And then I mean it's the 50s, so it's gonna be sexist, unfortunately. But I think that with most movies, and I haven't seen Virgin Suicides or whatever, but I think a lot of it is up to interpretation, and it might not be because obviously there's intention with the camera directing and everything. But the biggest question for me is like I like movies, but I have never thought that they reflect upon reality. So why would this why would how somebody's portrayed in the movie be important in like why is it a problem?
Because so one thing I will say about the Rear Window specifically is that I feel like it is a little bit ironic, although like Hitchcock does often objectify women, like in Psycho, whenever he, yeah, Vertigo, Psycho, and then like whenever he zooms in, um, I like when people, I'm not generalizing, I'm doing it for the point of what she said in the essay, men, although it can be women too, like watch these movies, like what she was explaining with Lacan's mirror theory is that male audience member places their identity within that male hero, uh, and like assumes his identity within that film and like watches him and observes him and like becomes him in a way. Um, and through that, they like he is allowed to treat that woman and view that woman on the screen however he wants. But since he also like places his like desires and sexual fantasies onto that woman, he reflects that within culture, like and within women around him, because like through that assumption and through that projecting his ID and his ego onto him, um, he's able to enact it, so he starts enacting it on others and like females within it, but also like females within the society. Like we see how men react to it, and then we try to emulate that, and it makes like Mr. Sutfield's talking about with male superheroes and like portraying their muscle, like Chris Evans and Captain America, um, like we see that like that causes like a almost a body dysmorphia for women. So it's like, okay, this is what men like, so this is what we need to appeal to, even though this is fantasy. Like this is not real life, but like that's what we try to emulate and try to recreate.
So it's less of a problem of what the director is doing and more of a problem of how it's making food and how easily molded people are by it, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I think it's like an inverse relationship because without the audience member looking at these and actively consuming these clearly like misogynistic films, not even clearly because it be like that male gaze can be portrayed like overtly or covertly within these films, like but like consuming these misogynistic films, like that's why the Hollywood continues to make them because they know it'll sell. Sex sells. Like when Megan Fox first came out, obviously first movie was Transformers. That car scene, very popular. She was a sexualized like figure within the media during that time. When Jennifer's Body came out, and like the previews were showing for it, the director, I forgot his name, played off of that like her being a sex symbol and her image within the media, and then to get people like men to go to watch that film, even though that is not what this film is about. Like that is not what Jennifer's Body is about. Um, so you could see like that reflection there. Because then like the teenage boys who went to go watch it were like, this is not what I thought it was gonna be. Like I thought it was just gonna be Megan Fox in strip clothing again, but it wasn't. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess the like I've always had the struggle with like because I'm not the kind of person who goes in like with memes. It's like I go and see this Ryan Gosling movie and I become the character, or whatever. Like they're like
American
Psycho.
Psycho.
Throw Tyler Green out there with Batman.
Yeah,
Because
no.
people like that, and it's like
It is.
If you think that that is bigger than there's the creator and then the consumer, and I think that the problem with the consumer has to do with
That's why I mentioned like the audience first, because like in her essay, like that is what she mainly focuses on and spends the most time on. I feel like a lot of these movies, which people like put their identity into, like American Psycho, Patrick Bateman, Tyler Durden in Fight Club, yes, like yes, exactly. Those are satire, and like people don't realize that. But Christian Bale, like when filming for American Psycho, went and talked to these Wall Street people that the movie is about, and was like, and they're like, oh yeah, we love a Patrick Bateman. And like, oh really? Like, do you? And Christian Bale was like, do you love him in an ironic way? Because that book is ironic. And he was like, no, we just love him. Like we are him. And I think that's the issue.